The snow that morning looked untouched, smooth as a blank page, except for the trail of footprints leading straight to our garage. We hadn't stepped outside since the night before, and even now, at 18, I can still feel the cold punch of that Thanksgiving morning in my chest. It never left me. It had started simply enough. My mom wanted the fireplace going to make the house feel festive, so she sent me out to grab some firewood from the stack behind the house. It was around 9. I threw on my jacket, jammed my feet into my boots, and stepped into the backyard where 3 or 4 inches of new snow coated everything in a clean, quiet layer. That's when I saw them, deep, heavy boot prints cutting straight across the yard from the fence. They weren't mine, and they definitely weren't from anyone in my family. They were large, easily a man's size, and the snow inside them was soft, not frozen over, meaning someone had walked through not long before I stepped out. Our yard was fenced on every side. Nobody used it as a shortcut. Whoever made those tracks walked with purpose, one steady line. No wandering, no hesitation. And the prints ended at the side door of our detached garage. Ended. No return trail, no pacing around, nothing. Just in. And then gone. A strange, sinking feeling opened up in my stomach. It was like realizing you'd walked into the second half of a story you didn't know had started. I stepped closer, my breath clouding the air. The tread pattern in the footprints was extremely clear, far bigger than my boots. The garage's side door looked untouched, perfectly straight, deadbolt set just like always. Only my mom and Rick had keys. Even if someone tried the handle, they shouldn't have been able to get inside. I didn't test it. Something in my brain whispered not to touch it, not to prove whether it would open or not while I was standing there alone in the snow. So I backed off, grabbed the firewood as fast as I could, and hurried inside. As soon as the warm air hit me, I almost felt foolish for how rattled I was. The house smelled like turkey, coffee, and my sister's waffles. The TV played quietly from the living room. Everything felt normal again. Rick was in the kitchen carving into the turkey he'd prepped the night before, doing his usual early morning, make it perfect, routine. My mom always joked it was his holiday ritual of control. I dropped the firewood by the back door and said, "Hey, did you go out to the garage today?" He paused mid-cut. "No." "Why?" "There are footprints in the yard. Big ones. They go from the fence to the garage door. They don't come back." His whole expression shifted, serious in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand up. He set the knife down and wiped his hands on a towel, studying me like he was checking if I was messing with him. "You sure they aren't yours from last night?" "I didn't go out there," I said. "And they're way bigger. They look fresh." He didn't argue. He just picked up his phone. My mom turned from the stove, frowning. "What's going on?" "Just stay inside," Rick said. "Lock the doors. Don't open for anyone except me or Dave." "Why, Rick? What's happening?" "It's probably nothing," he said, already dialing. "Just do it." He stepped aside as his call connected. "Hey, Dave. I need you to come over for a minute. Bring a flashlight." He hung up without explaining anything, which scared me more than if he'd told us straight out. Dave lived 2 houses down. Ex-military, the type who still did morning workouts in his driveway like he never left basic training. He showed up in less than 5 minutes and knocked hard on the back door, flashlight already in hand despite the bright reflection off the snow. Rick let him in. They spoke quietly in the corner while I hovered near the table pretending I wasn't straining to hear every word. "At what point do we call the police?" Dave asked softly. "Not yet," Rick murmured. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." My mom finally snapped. "Can somebody tell me what is going on?" Rick looked at her, then at my little sister curled on the couch, and chose his words carefully. "We're just checking the garage. Stay here. Lock everything. Keep your phone on you." It wasn't comforting, but it made enough sense that she didn't argue. I grabbed the old aluminum baseball bat by the back door. I wasn't planning to wait around unarmed while they went to check out something we all clearly felt was wrong. Rick and Dave walked out to the garage while I stood on the porch, gripping the bat so hard my fingers ached. My mom hovered at the window behind me, asking what they were doing, and all I could say was, checking something, trying to sound calm. I watched Rick unlock the side door with his key. Both of them went inside. For a minute or two, maybe less, maybe more, I couldn't hear a thing. No talking. No footsteps. Nothing. Then the door opened again. And Rick stepped out holding onto the arm of a man I had never seen before. He looked filthy, like he'd been sleeping outside for days, maybe in his 40s, wearing a ripped jacket and jeans stiff with cold. He didn't fight. Didn't say a word. Just stared at the ground like he knew the night was over for him. Dave already had the phone to his ear, calling the police. And the only thought in my head was that the footprints had only shown where he walked in. Not where he had been waiting. The snow in our yard looked untouched that Thanksgiving morning, except for one thing, deep, heavy footprints cutting straight across the backyard toward our garage. I was 18 then, just stepping outside to grab firewood for my mom. It was about 9 in the morning, cold enough that my breath hung in the air. The tracks didn't belong to anyone in our house. They were too large for mine, closer to a man's work boots, and so fresh the edges were still sharp. They came from the back fence, through a part of the yard no one ever enters, and stopped right at the garage's side door. No return trail. No hesitation. Just a clean path in and nothing out. I didn't even touch the handle. Something in my gut told me not to. I backed away, grabbed the firewood, and rushed inside. The house smelled like turkey and coffee. My mom was fussing at the stove, the TV murmured in the other room, and everything felt normal until I told Rick what I'd seen. He froze mid-cut, knife in hand. "You go out there this morning?" I asked. "No." "Why?" I told him. He didn't brush it off. He wiped his hands, picked up his phone, and his face tightened in a way that made my stomach drop. Mom asked what was going on, but Rick only said, "Lock the doors. Stay inside." Then he called our neighbor Dave, the ex-military guy nobody ever wants to mess with, and asked him to bring a flashlight. 5 minutes later, Dave was at the door, already geared up like he knew something was wrong. They talked quietly, then headed for the garage. I stood on the porch with a baseball bat, waiting. 2 minutes later they came out, with a man between them. Dirty jacket, worn jeans, maybe mid-40s. He didn't fight. He just stared at the ground while Dave called the police. When the officers arrived, they split up, one questioning the man, the other going with Rick into the garage. Later, they brought us in to see what they'd found. Behind our Christmas boxes, the stranger had built himself a little nest, an old blanket from our camping gear, our space heater plugged in and aimed at it, empty food wrappers, a liquor bottle, cigarette butts pressed into the concrete. The officer said he'd probably been living there for 3 days, slipping through the loose window above the workbench, the same window Rick kept meaning to fix. The man's name was Tom. Homeless, in and out of shelters, a record full of trespassing and public intoxication but nothing violent. Even so, the officer said, you don't want someone living this close without knowing. Tom kept apologizing from the back of the squad car. I just needed warmth, he said. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. Rick didn't say anything to him. Just folded his arms and stared at the car until it drove away. That afternoon he replaced the lock on the side door and finally fixed the window. He kept muttering that he should have done it sooner. Dave helped us check every door, every basement window, every latch on the house. Mom kept touching the locks all day like she needed to feel them to believe they were really secure. My little sister refused to sleep downstairs. Rick carried her pillow upstairs without arguing. That night, I lay awake replaying every sound from the last few days, wondering which ones belonged to Tom. The idea that he had heard us, our conversations, our routines, made me feel exposed in a way I never really shook off. And as awful as that was, it wasn't the last time Thanksgiving scared me. 2 years later, at 19, I nearly died on my favorite bike trail. After dinner that year, I needed to move, to clear my head. There's a wooded loop behind our neighborhood I'd been riding since I was 12. I told my parents I'd be back before dark, put on my helmet, and pedaled toward the trailhead. Only 2 trucks were in the gravel lot. Nobody around. The trail was quiet, dead quiet. I pushed harder, enjoying the speed, the cold air, the familiar shapes of the pines. My favorite part was a downhill with a sharp left at the bottom. I'd ridden it hundreds of times. That night, I decided not to brake at all. As I approached the bend, something stretched across the trail caught the light, thin, gray, almost invisible. Too late. Steel cable. It hit me across the chest and shoulder with a force that ripped me off the bike. I slammed onto my back, vision flashing white. Breathing felt impossible, my chest screamed. When I touched my collarbone, I felt the bone lifted at an angle it shouldn't be. Then I heard laughter. 3 men sat on a fallen log off to the right. Camo jackets, hunting caps, a case of beer between them. The one with the gray beard held up 6 fingers. "Number 6, he shouted. "Joe, pay up." They weren't joking. They had set that trap on purpose. I realized, lying there, that if they decided to walk over, I was done. Pure fear moved me. I dragged myself up, grabbed the bike with my good arm, and rode away in jagged bursts of pain while they laughed behind me. By some miracle, I made it to the parking lot, where a woman walking her dog called 911. Police found the cable still tied between the trees, along with the men's beer cans and cigarette butts. But by the time officers reached the spot, the men were gone. No cameras. No nearby houses. Fingerprints on the cans didn't match anyone in the database. The case went inactive. The city eventually chained the trail entrance. It's still closed. My collarbone healed, but the scar from the cable never vanished. Neither did the fear. I haven't ridden in the woods since. And then there was Thanksgiving 6 years ago, the night I walked into my parents' garage and saw my older brother doing something I still can't fully talk about. Marcus, the golden child. The one I trusted. The one who helped me when I dropped out of college. But that night, everything I thought I knew about him shattered the moment I saw what he was doing in that garage. Rick had guided the stranger onto our back patio and told him to sit on the step, and that was the moment my mom glanced out the kitchen window and froze. Her gasp drew me over, and before any of us had time to process what we were seeing, the police were already on their way. About 10 minutes later, a squad car rolled up with 2 officers. They spoke quietly to the man, who introduced himself as Tom Randall, while Rick explained everything. One officer stayed with Tom, asking him questions about whether he'd been alone, whether he had weapons, whether he'd tried to enter the house. The other officer walked with Rick toward the garage. I stood inside the back door holding a baseball bat I wasn't even sure I could swing effectively, my mom's hand tight on my shoulder, my younger sister pressed into her side, all of us trying to make sense of the situation. Even from inside, we could tell this wasn't an innocent mistake or someone who had wandered into the wrong house. When the officer came back, he quietly instructed his partner to take Tom to the car. Then he told Rick he wanted us to see what was inside the garage. Rick looked at me and said, "Yeah. He should see it." I followed them with my chest tight. Inside, behind a stack of dusty Christmas bins, was a bed made from one of our old camping blankets. The space heater we thought we had misplaced was plugged in and pointed directly at it. Food wrappers, an empty bottle of cheap liquor, and cigarette butts littered the corner. Part of the blanket was burned, a small blackened patch curling at the edges. The officer explained that Tom had probably been living there for 3 days, slipping in and out through a loose window above the workbench, lifting it out and placing it back each time so it looked untouched. He told us Tom was known around town as a homeless man who drifted between shelters, picked up for trespassing and drinking in public, but had no violent charges. Even so, he said, you don't want someone living this close to your family without you knowing it. When we stepped outside, Tom was already in the back seat of the squad car, leaning toward the small gap in the window, looking at Rick and then at me with a shaky voice. I'm sorry. I just needed somewhere warm. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. I stayed out of the house. Rick just stood there, arms folded, jaw locked tight, saying nothing. The officers finished taking statements while my mom asked what would happen next. One officer said Tom would spend a night or two in jail for trespassing and then likely be released. My mom kept staring at the garage, then at the house, then at us, like she was imagining the nights we'd slept there while a stranger lay only a thin wall away. Dave, our neighbor, stayed until the squad car drove off, Tom still looking back at us through the rear window until the car turned the corner. That afternoon Rick replaced the lock on the garage's side door and finally fixed the back window, sealing it properly this time. He kept muttering that he should have done it months earlier, as if he were scolding himself rather than talking to us. Dave helped us walk the perimeter of the house, checking every basement window, every sliding door, every latch. I followed them, listening for each lock to click shut. Thanksgiving dinner went on as planned, but the easy warmth of it was gone. Mom stood up repeatedly, pretending to fetch something, only to touch each lock before returning to her seat. My sister refused to sleep in her downstairs bedroom. She quietly dragged her blankets upstairs to my parents' room. Rick carried her pillow up without argument. That night, I lay awake replaying the past few days, wondering which sounds I had ignored. I kept thinking about the wall between the garage and our living room, how thin it really was. How Tom had probably heard us laughing, talking, watching TV. How he must have learned our schedule, when the cars left, when lights went off, when silence settled. By morning, the footprints he had left in the snow were nearly gone, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me like a shadow I couldn't shake. 2 days later, something else happened, something that changed my relationship with fear entirely. That Thanksgiving, I almost died on my favorite bike trail. I was 19, home from my first semester of college. After dinner, the house felt stiff and too quiet, I needed to move. Behind our neighborhood was a looping woods trail where I'd been riding since I was 12. I told my parents I'd take one quick lap. Dad waved absently from the couch. Mom said, back before dark. There were 40 minutes of daylight left. I pedaled out to the gravel lot. Only 2 trucks sat there, but no one was around. It was eerily still. I shrugged it off and pushed through the wooden gate. The familiar rhythm of the trail settled into my body, pushing through the curves, lifting off small roots, coasting the dips. I noticed how strangely quiet everything was, no wind, no birds, only my breathing. A nervous pulse crept up my spine, so I rode faster. My favorite section was a downhill near the far side of the loop, ending in a sharp left turn. I'd ridden it clean 100 times. That evening, I decided not to brake at all. I let the bike pick up speed, the trees blurring at the edges. As I leaned into the left turn, I saw it, just a split second too late. A thin gray line stretched across the trail between 2 trees at chest level. For a heartbeat, my brain refused to understand what it was. Then it registered, steel cable. It hit me before I could move. The impact crushed across my upper chest and shoulder, stopping that half of my body instantly. My momentum snapped me backward off the bike, slamming me to the ground. Everything went white. When sound returned, it was only the brutal rasp of my own breath failing to enter my lungs. Something sharp shifted inside my chest every time I tried. I slid my fingers along my collarbone with my good arm and felt the hard ridge of bone pushing up beneath the skin. Broken. Definitely broken. Then I heard it, laughter. Deep, unbothered laughter. I turned my head slowly, pain firing through every nerve. Off to the right of the trail, 3 grown men sat on a fallen tree, dressed in camouflage and hunting caps, beer cans scattered at their feet. One with a gray beard lifted his hand and showed 6 fingers. "Number 6, he yelled. "Joe, you owe me 20. Another slapped his knee, saying something about how I'd flown. The third just drank his beer and smirked. They didn't stand up. Didn't ask if I was alive. They just watched. That was when it fully clicked. They had strung that cable across a public bike trail and settled down to bet on who would hit it. They were keeping count. I was number 6. Fear finally cut through the shock. If they decided to approach me, I had no chance. My right arm was useless, my ribs were screaming, and the woods were empty. No one would hear me. I forced myself onto my side, grabbed my bike with my left hand, and turned it around without looking at them. The first push on the pedal sent a bolt of pain across my chest so intense my vision narrowed. One of the men shouted, "Run," and another laughed, but none of them followed. I rode in bursts, pushing, coasting, gasping. When the trees opened and the gravel lot appeared, the relief was so sharp I nearly collapsed. There was a single SUV there, and a woman with a dog. She saw my arm hanging, my face, the way I couldn't stand straight, and ran over. "Are you okay?" she asked. I forced out, "I need an ambulance." "And the police." Someone put a steel cable across the trail. Her eyes widened as she guided me to the curb and called 911. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes. I told them everything, the cable, the men, their bets. Officers headed down the trail and soon radioed back that they had found the cable tied between 2 trees. At the hospital, X-rays confirmed the broken collarbone and ribs. A detective visited later that night, taking notes, asking questions, promising they'd check fingerprints from the beer cans and the crushed box left behind. A week later, he called to say the prints belonged to no one in the system. No cameras, no plates, no names. The case went inactive. The city shut down the trail. Warning signs went up and never came down. Years passed. The pale scar the cable left across my chest faded but never disappeared. I finished school, moved away, tried to bury the memory in the back of my mind. But sometimes the sound of a beer can opening or the sudden quiet of a wooded path brings it all back, the cold realization that 3 men injured 6 people for fun and walked away without consequence. And woven into it all is the memory of that Thanksgiving week, the stranger in our garage, the trail, the cable, the laughter. It's the knowledge that sometimes danger comes not in the form of shadows or monsters, but from people hiding in plain sight, people who watch you without you ever noticing, people who attach their amusement to your pain. I still don't ride in the woods anymore. Not ever. That sense of being observed, of someone unseen taking note of your routine, your presence, your vulnerability, never fully leaves. By around 10, people had already started putting on coats when the front door opened again and Connor's older brother walked in. Derek, 22, living in the next town, working as a mechanic, was exactly the kind of person you could recognize as trouble before he even spoke. Taller and broader than Connor, buzz cut, a dark tattoo on his forearm, that loose swagger that comes from drinking in the car on the way over. He hugged his mom, slapped his dad's shoulder, muttered something about traffic, all in this slurry, half-tangled voice. When Connor introduced us, Derek gave me a slow up and down look before shaking my hand, the kind of handshake meant to make you self-conscious. "So, you're the famous girlfriend," he said, smirking at Connor. I laughed weakly, unsure what else to do. We all went back to the table so he could grab a plate. Derek sat directly across from me, shoulders wide, leaning back like he owned the whole room. While conversation moved around us, he kept locking eyes with me, long pauses, a crooked little smile, like he was having a private conversation I wasn't part of. It unsettled me enough that Connor slid his hand onto mine under the table and laced our fingers together. I tried to focus on Jennifer asking about my college plans, telling myself Derek was just drunk and awkward. After dinner, Derek stayed in the living room with Roger, drinking more beer and shouting at the football game. Jennifer went upstairs, saying she needed sleep for Black Friday. Connor suggested we watch a movie in the finished basement, better than pretending to care about football commentary, so we went downstairs with the door half open the way his parents preferred. For a while, it felt normal again, joking about his relatives, teasing his dad's obsession with football, laughing until my eyes burned from exhaustion. Around midnight, Connor paused the movie and told me to sleep. He walked me upstairs, kissed me outside the guest room, then went into his old room across the hall. The TV downstairs eventually clicked off. The house settled into that stillness old houses get, where every distant shift of wood sounds like it's watching you. I don't know how long I slept before I woke to the pressure on the mattress, the unmistakable dip of someone sitting beside me. At first, half dreaming, I thought maybe Jennifer was checking on me, or Connor had snuck in, but the room was dark except for the thin line of hallway light under the door. Then I smelled it, beer and cigarettes, sharp and sour. My eyes adjusted. Derek was sitting at the edge of the bed, facing me. One hand braced by my hip, the other resting heavy on my leg over the blanket. Every muscle in my body went rigid. Before I could reach for the lamp, he spoke, low and rough, "Don't scream. I just wanted to talk." My heart slammed so hard it felt like it was trying to claw out of my throat. I pulled my leg away, curling the blanket tight around me as he leaned closer. His face was slack from alcohol, but his eyes were focused, too focused. "You're too pretty for my little brother," he whispered. When I tried to scoot toward the wall, his hand clamped down on my shoulder, fingers digging through fabric. "Relax," he muttered, sliding his other hand under the blanket, moving up my thigh. His mouth pressed against my cheek, breath hot and stale. Fear finally cut through the haze. I shoved him back with both hands and screamed. Connor burst in almost instantly, flipping on the light. In that sudden brightness, everything happened at once, Derek jerking back, Connor seeing exactly where his brother's hands were, and then Connor launching himself forward, slamming Derek off the bed. They crashed into the nightstand as Connor punched him again and again. Derek tried to shield himself, cursing, sounding more irritated than remorseful. Roger barreled in, dragged Connor off Derek with a terrified kind of strength, shoved Connor toward the doorway, then turned on Derek, yanking him upright and ordering him downstairs. Jennifer ran in, saw me curled on the bed shaking, and rushed over, repeating "I'm sorry" over and over as she pulled me into her arms. Downstairs, Roger's shouting rose through the floorboards, furious, cracking under the strain, then the front door slammed hard. A car started. Tires on gravel. Silence. Connor came back up with reddening knuckles, breath shaky. Jennifer brought tea and a cold washcloth she didn't seem to know what to do with. Roger returned a minute later, apologizing, promising Derek would never step foot in the house again. My voice shook when I said I wanted to call the police. The air changed instantly. Connor's grip tightened, Jennifer's eyes flicked to Roger. She sat beside me and gently asked if maybe we shouldn't ruin the holiday since Derek was already gone. Roger said Derek was struggling, drinking too much since his breakup, and a criminal record would destroy him. What he did was wrong, he said, but let us handle it as a family. I looked at Connor. He stared at the carpet. "It's your call," he said, voice quiet. "I'll back you either way." But he wouldn't meet my eyes. Cornered by their hope and guilt, I heard myself agree not to call. The relief in the room was immediate. Heavy. Wrong. Nobody slept after that. At dawn, I packed my bag and told them I wanted to leave. Jennifer hugged me at the door. Roger hovered in the background. Connor walked me to my car. We stayed together another month, but I felt sick around his family, and eventually I ended things without ever telling my parents. For a long time, I thought that Thanksgiving would be the worst holiday memory I'd ever carry. But danger doesn't have categories. It just shows up in different clothes. I still remember the sound my fork made when it hit the plate later that year as David's wife whispered to him, "Get the gun." It was a corporate Thanksgiving dinner at my senior colleague David's house. I was 25, still new at the company. David had sort of adopted me, fixing my slides, giving me advice, bringing me into rooms I hadn't earned yet. Inviting me to Thanksgiving felt like an initiation into adulthood, into belonging. His wife, Lauren, had decorated everything like a magazine spread. Warm lights, polished silver, turkey carved with surgical precision. We were on our second glass of wine, telling dumb office stories, when her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it casually and went white. David noticed instantly. "You okay?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Just slid the phone to him. Whatever he read, it tightened his jaw. They disappeared into the hallway. I heard the front door chain rattle once. When they returned, both were smiling too hard, the kind of forced happiness that makes your stomach twist. Lauren refilled everyone's wine with a trembling hand. I told myself it was family drama. Not my business. Then her phone buzzed again. She snatched it so fast her fork jumped. "Read." Set it face down. A few minutes later, an engine outside slowed, then stopped. Headlights swept across the dining room wall and stayed. No guests were expected. David pushed back his chair. "Who wants to watch the game upstairs?" he asked, voice too bright. Everyone followed Lauren into the dark media room. She turned on a football game but stayed near the door, remote in one hand, phone in the other. Her smile made her look brittle. Tracy finally asked, "Is everything okay?" And Lauren said, "Please, just stay up here. Don't go downstairs unless David comes for you. Lock the door if he tells you to." That last part chilled the room. Downstairs, voices rose, male, tense, angry. Something heavy hit the wall. Someone paced. Jenna muted the TV to listen before Lauren glared at her and she turned it back up. I walked to the window. Pulled the curtain an inch. A black SUV was parked almost sideways behind the other cars. Driver's door open. Two men on the porch. One holding something long and angular, not a shotgun. Not something you see in normal life. "What is going on?" Tracy whispered. "Please," Lauren said again, voice cracking. "Just stay in this room." Time stretched. Lauren texted frantically, then froze, staring at her phone like waiting for a verdict. Somewhere below, a shout erupted, then another. A thud shook the floor. Sirens eventually grew louder, and Lauren exhaled, whispering, "Okay, okay." By the time police arrived, David and their neighbor Mike already had the intruder pinned. We were escorted downstairs to flashing lights and cold air pouring through the open door. A man in his 50s sat handcuffed on the driveway, screaming insults. The black SUV's trunk was open, officers photographing something inside.